Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladarga Velazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. After 491 days, that's 16 months in Hamas captivity, released hostage Eli Sharabi is finally free. But his ordeal is far from over. In his first courageous interview since his release, he recounts the horrors he endured, the relentless beatings, the psychological terror, but above all, the starvation, the hunger.
שאנשים יחשבו טוב טוב בבית כשהם פותחים מקרר, זה עולם ומלואו. זה עולם ומלואו לפתוח מקרר. המושג הזה בכלל, של אדם חופשי שיכול לקחת משם פרי, או ירק, או ביצה, או מים, או שק לחם. על זה אתה חולם כל יום. לא אכפת לך מהמכות שאתה חוטף, ואתה חוטף מכות, ושוברים לי צלעות. לא אכפת לי.
הרעב.
תן לי עוד חצי פיתה.
אפשר להסביר את התחושה של הרעב?
אי אפשר.
זה הבטן שנדבקת לגב?
בטן שנדבקת לגב, אבל אתה כבר רואה את הבטן שלך ממש נכנסת פנימה באיזשהו שלב, אתה לא מאמין שזה קורה לגוף שלך.
Sharabi, a 53-year-old man, returned from captivity weighing just 44 kilograms. His body is weak, but his spirit remains unbroken. U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly watched Sharabi's emotional and gut-wrenching testimony on Israeli television and invited him to the White House. Despite his fragile condition, his brother Sharon, who has been fighting relentlessly for his release since his abduction on October 7th, says this is a critical moment for the hostages still in Gaza, and so the two will try to make the journey to Washington. After watching the full-length interview, one thing is certain: Eli Sharabi is no ordinary man. In fact, he really is one of a kind. He survived brutal captivity in Gaza. His wife and two daughters were murdered by Hamas. His brother Eli died in captivity. His home was destroyed. And yet somehow he still finds the strength to be grateful, to speak up, and to fight, not for himself, but for those who remain behind. And joining us now with more on a potential return to the war in Gaza is Dr. Harel Chorev, a senior researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Israeli leaders say return the hostages now or the war will renew and the gates of hell will open. You know, that's a pretty clear message. Is that the direction we're heading in?
Well, it might be. I think Israel is trying to improve the conditions of such a deal. At the moment, it's quite rigid on behalf of Hamas. And I think Israel is creating a lot of pressure, not only within Hamas, but also among the Arab countries. And this is the reason why we see an unmatured decision that will probably be held tomorrow by the Arab countries to create this two forces that are working together in a pinset move to put pressure on Hamas. And this is basically what Israel is claiming at the moment. We want different deal, and if we won't get better conditions, we will go to war. I'm not sure it's behind the door, but at the moment, this is exactly what we are projecting to Hamas.
Mm-hmm. And so Israel says the gates of hell will open on Hamas in Gaza. What kind of military operation then would we be talking about?
Well, we just heard 2-3 days ago that Secretary of State Marco Rubio approved an additional $4 billion in ammunition to Israel, which adds up to $12 billion just from the beginning of the Trump administration. This is something that signals a real a real force, backing by the US to Israel, and that the war will not be held in a moderate manner like we saw in the past year under the Biden administration. It would be much more aggressive, less infantry on the ground and more fire from the air. And I think this is exactly the message that they're trying to send to Hamas, that it won't look as it looked by the end of the first phase of the war. And I think not only you see, we didn't attack basically 30% out of the Gaza Strip. The reason is very simple. We have hostages there, and Israel avoided from attacking those 30%, mainly in the central camps and central Gaza, because of this reason. I think that if Israel will go again into war with full force, we will see something throughout the Gaza Strip, including in those areas.
Mm-hmm. And you know, Israel is already blocking the humanitarian aid into Gaza, and we know that Israel, though, has made certain concessions as part of this ceasefire deal. Do you expect that the ground forces would move quickly to sort of return to pre-ceasefire positions inside Gaza? You mentioned that it would be more likely attacks from the air, but would we likely see another sort of wide-scale ground invasion as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of the things that Israel might do. First and foremost, to offset all the achievements, the military achievements of Hamas in the first phase. And first, I would think about the Netzarim corridor that was evacuated. Israel can take it back within hours, and this is something that we knew even before we draw, and it's totally achievable. And all of that is really to project to Hamas that it needs to ease its conditions. I would also give an attention to what Egypt offered just 2 days ago. I think the Arabs are under a lot of pressure. On the one hand, the Trump plan to exile the Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt. So they want to find a solution of their own, an alternative. And on the other hand, Israel that is pushing forward to attack the Gaza Strip. And therefore, what we get is those two things that we just saw in the past 2 days. One is an Egyptian offer to postpone the ceasefire, or to extend the ceasefire in another 2 weeks, and to get 3 hostages, live hostages back, and 3 dead hostages, unfortunately, back, and to postpone it in 2 weeks. They want to earn time in order to try to find a solution, first and foremost within the Arab countries, because, as we said, their decision at the moment is far from being matured and I would say clusterized and coherent.
All right, well, certainly fateful days ahead of us. Dr. Harel Chorev, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And the Egyptian vision for post-war Gaza is being presented today at the Arab League summit in Cairo as a counter-proposal to the Trump plan for Gaza. Details of the Arab plan have emerged, signaling no role for Hamas. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
The Egyptian plan was created as a counter-proposal to U.S. President Donald Trump's Gaza plan that envisioned the removal of the population and the enclave's ownership by the U.S. The Egyptian plan has yet to be published, but it does reportedly sideline Hamas and replace it with Arab, Muslim, and Western states. Hamas has so far rejected the notion of any proposal being imposed on the Palestinians. Cairo's plan reportedly does not tackle the issue of who would pay for Gaza's reconstruction and is short on details of how Gaza would be governed or how an armed group like Hamas would be dealt with. But emerging details say a so-called governance assistance mission would replace the Hamas-run government in Gaza and would be responsible for humanitarian aid and reconstruction of the enclave. The preamble of the proposal notes there will be no major international funding for the reconstruction of Gaza if Hamas remains the dominant armed political element on the ground controlling local governance. The plan does not specify who would run the government's mission. Instead, it says it will draw on the expertise of Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere to help Gaza recover as quickly as possible. The proposal envisions an international stabilization force that would be made up of Arab forces that would provide security and the eventual creation of a new local police force. The force would be run by a board comprised of Arab and Muslim countries, the U.S., Britain, the EU, and others. The plan does not detail a central governing role for the Palestinian Authority. The cost for rebuilding Gaza is estimated by the UN to be more than $53 billion. Gulf and Arab states will reportedly be asked to contribute at least $20 billion to the initial phase of reconstruction.
Thanks so much for that report, Steve. Now, with the first phase of the ceasefire deal now over, Israeli society and families of hostages are in a state of limbo, wondering what will happen next after news that Hamas rejected the new U.S. proposal to extend the first phase of this deal. Now, joining us now to help us make sense of what could happen next is retired Colonel Amit Asa, a former member of the Israeli Security Agency. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, good afternoon.
Now, this deal has been in an extremely fragile state from the beginning, but realistically, what could happen next? How long will this state of limbo continue for?
As we understand, the first stage and the second stage that we are it's on the table really was planned with the Biden administration. While Trump administration is getting in, we finished the first stage, and now Trump is leading us to another point of view to put all the hostages back in this stage or other stage. But it's another point of view, it's another approach that Israeli have to bring everybody home as one phase. Even if it will be in two phases, we want them back in a very fast move, and it's not connected to any phase that was brought on the table before. It's another kind and a new negotiation that we will have to bring. Now, Hamas, of course, will approach this deal with a no answer, because Hamas wants time, and Hamas wants to be the leader and to be ruling Gaza. And this is a thing that Israel can't accept.
Now, tell me why the U.S. presented this brand new proposal and not continue with the framework that was set of this phase two. Why something brand new? Why not continue with what was apparently set in the negotiating process?
I think President Trump brought a very new approach that wants everybody to put everything very fast and not in few phases. And this is the only thing that we have to look for today. And Hamas, of course, will say no. It will lead us to a clash of army getting into Gaza and forcing Hamas to accept these terms of Trump.
Now, is it possible with Hamas's rejection of this deal, there could be new framework in the future, or would negotiators go directly to phase two? We've seen so many different talks and conversations. What do you think is actually feasible?
I think the government of Israel is putting more pressure now in Hamas, and part of it is the humanitarian aid. It's not just the humanitarian. We know that they have a lot of food inside Gaza. Who's holding this food is the Hamas. Now the pressure will be from the society, from the Palestinian to the Hamas, to bring them the food that they have on their hands. So it's not that we are stopping humanitarian aid to Gaza. It's just we are forcing the Hamas to give their humanitarian aid that we brought into Hamas to the hands of the Hamas to bring them to the people. Then this kind of a pressure on Hamas, and if we will add other kind of pressures like a force and army, and maybe some movement of the army will be made in few days, I think every one of the steps will get the Hamas into the pressure that they will understand that they have no choice. They have to put the arm down and put everybody of the Hamas, all the Hamas members, out of Gaza.
And I want to ask you about this second terror attack within this week that took place in Haifa this morning. Several people were injured. We're learning that an elderly man was actually stabbed to death. Talk to me about what this means for the security, the internal security here in the state of Israel.
I think all citizens of Israel knows that we are in a time of war. In time of war, there is a lot of motivations all over, not just Palestinian from Gaza, it's Palestinian from the Judea and Samaria. It's also other members, as we saw today, is a terrorist that came out from Israel. He's been a lot of years in Germany, and then maybe he was getting into a terrorist cell and came into Israel and do this terror. We can see any kind of terror, maybe attempt inside Israel and on the borders and in Judea and Samaria. We on a wartime, and now all the measures of the police and all the measures of the Shin Bet is up to get all the information that we can to bring these terror attacks down before they act.
Thank you so much for your perspective on this. It's certainly something we will continue to follow. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve, for that report. And with the ongoing operations inside of Judea and Samaria, and with recent terror attacks here in Israel, joining us now to discuss is Brigadier General Reserve Nitzan Nuriel, the former head of Counterterrorism Bureau at the Prime Minister's office. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Now, let's first discuss the new IDF Chief of Staff that is taking office today, Eyal Zamir. He's taking office at a very complex time here in Israel with a large counterterrorism focus, with operations happening in Judea and Samaria, and this current pause in the ceasefire deal. Tell us what you think Zamir's top priorities likely are as he steps into this role.
I believe that Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir has three main missions. Two of them are not related to the military operation, is the budget issue as well as the long plan to recover the IDF. And the second issue is the ultra-Orthodox recruitment process, which is both are in a way political issues, but he needs to handle them. From the military point of view, he has to understand and translate the cabinet directions into military operations. We need to understand that the military does not pick his own missions. He has to understand what the political echelon are looking for him, try to figure out the details, and then launch a military actions. And those are the three main challenges he has to deal with.
I want to talk about these large operations that are happening right now inside of Judea and Samaria. We reported earlier in the show that the IDF is saying that they killed a Hamas commander there yesterday. How significant of news is this?
Generally speaking, whenever you kill someone, it's probably for the short term a good news. In the mid and the long term, it does not really change the picture unless you are talking about someone who belonged to the level of Hassan Nasrallah or Imad Murnia. If we are talking about the average leaders, it will create few days or week of best position for us, but for the long term, somebody else will come, take over, And again, we will have to run after the number one or number two in all those organizations.
Yeah, and I want to definitely now talk about, there were two recent terror attacks here in Israel that took place. We're actually hearing right now that one of the victims of the Karkur stabbing terror attack, this car ramming that took place, actually just died. Just a tragedy. These two happened within the same week. Tell us how security, internal security here in Israel will be dealing with the ongoing threat of possible terror attacks that could happen in the future. How will they handle that?
We are in the beginning of the Ramadan month, which statistically, the numbers of terror events in Judah and Samaria, inside Israel, at that period are always high. The way to deal with them is as much as we can, police on the streets, soldiers, and yet I know that they are very busy in other fronts. But if we want to make those potential terror events short as much as we can, we need armed people on the street that will be able to understand the situation and stop it. Obviously, unfortunately, sometimes we have people who make mistakes and we have casualties among us. But the only way to make sure that that wave of terrorism will not be too strong or too wide is to have armed people on the street, well-trained and ready to take responsibility.
Thank you so much for your time today and your perspective with all of your knowledge. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now a man in Beersheba is accused of contacting Iranian agents and pretending to have access to Israel's nuclear research center in the Negev and offering sensitive information to them. Now, after police and Shabak conducted a months-long investigation, they say Doron Bokovza was indicted by the Southern District Attorney's Office for trying to give information to Iran when it was already public knowledge, according to the agencies. Now, police say after Bokovza initiated the contact with Iranian agents, he carried out several tasks for them, including taking photographs of the facilities and even transferring information. Now, Bokovza is indicted on charges on contacting a foreign agent and passing information to the enemy.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.